First of all, thank you all so much for being here. My name is Stephanie Loiter, and I'm the director of the Mexico Security Initiative at the Robert Strauss Center here at UT Austin. And it is my great honor today to introduce the guest speaker, Gabriella Sanchez. So Gabriella is a world-renowned expert on migrant smuggling and joins us today from her position as a research fellow in the European University Institute in Florence, Italy. Gabriella is a sociocultural anthropologist by training with a PhD from Arizona State University, and she's produced groundbreaking ethnographic work on the social organization of migrant smuggling. Much of this research was conducted alongside smuggling facilitators themselves. So today, Gabriella will be speaking about children and youth in the migrant smuggling market, and will surely break some of our stereotypes about migrant smuggling in the process. So thank you all again for being here, and I'll hand it over to Gabriella.
So thank you, Stephanie, for inviting me, for making all of this possible, and thank you to all of you for being here today. I think my grandmother would probably say, like, world-renowned, like mi vecina no la conoce. She's over somewhere, like not even my neighbors know her. So thank you again so much to all of you for being here, for being interested on one of the topics that has, it generates so much interest, and regardless of the location where you're from, right before I went to the MPC, I was at UTEP, right in El Paso, and I have actually one of my former students here, so thank you so much also for driving all the way. But the experience in Europe has actually helped me frame a lot of the ideas, a lot of the notions that I had concerning the work that I had been doing along the U.S. Mexico border. So this is a project that was actually funded, by UT Austin, and so I'm twice as excited to present it here, because this is something that your school was able to, see, I'm so excited that I don't even know how to put it together. But let's just tackle into it, because I have a lot of, I really want to share as much as I can about the research and have time to answer as many questions as I can. So what are we dealing with? What is smuggling? Who can tell me what smuggling is? Here I am, going back to my lecture. What's smuggling? We usually think of, the people riding on top of the trains in the case of Mexico, or some of the people who are traveling on the boats, coming from North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa into Europe. They are everywhere, right? Smuggling is everywhere, or at least we get some of those notions from what we see when we watch on television. At the same time, and this was part of a conversation that we were just having this morning, data is all over the place, right? So everybody knows what smuggling is, there's representations everywhere, but there's really not a lot of research. And governments, agencies have their own data sources, but they have really not done a very good job at communicating that data for what it means. And a lot of people have actually started looking into research, doing more empirical work on why looking into research, looking into smuggling and what it is, the facilitation of border crossings or of migrants' journeys. But most of this work has actually looked into the criminological aspects. And that emphasis comes from a protocol that was actually signed by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime that stipulates what smuggling is. So this is mostly the practice of a person entering a country different, from his or her own, undetected, or without having it voluntarily, that is the key word, without being officially admitted into the country. So that is what the protocol says. It is also very much based on the notion that we are tackling a form of organized crime. What is the definition of organized crime? Yeah, many times when it comes to the U.S. Mexico border, we think of drug trafficking organizations, kidnappings, robberies, extortion. But actually, the protocol of the United Nations establishes that organized crime is any criminal activity that is carried out by a group of 3 or more. So in a sense, I think many of us have engaged in organized crime at some point in our lives, but we wouldn't accept it. But there is at the same time growing recognition within the United Nations itself as an organization, that the protocol as it is supposed to be, as it is intended to be enforced, really doesn't address the needs of the people on the ground. And that in fact many times has facilitated the victimization, further victimization of migrants or people who need or who deserve some level of protection. So that takes us to the case of migrant smuggling in our country, in the United States. The United States is perhaps the only country in the world that is actually keeping track of how many people are prosecuted for smuggling offenses at the federal level. So this data comes from the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And when we look at some of their estimates and some of the numbers that they provide, we see that about 25 people are convicted for smuggling of migrants in the country at the federal level. And these numbers have actually remained pretty consistent since 1994. So for the last, 24 years, the number has remained, about the same. One of the changes, however, is the distribution when it comes to gender. So about a third of the people who are convicted every year at the federal level for smuggling are women. So this is already, I think, in a sense, challenging some of the perceptions that we have when we think about smuggling, as being it is a predominantly male role or task. But the fact that it has also increased by about 10% over the last 20 years is also a matter of concern. The number of prosecutions, or the data that we have rather from the U.S. Sentencing Commission reveals that most of these cases involve very small-scale operations. And by that I mean the facilitation of border crossings of groups that go anywhere between 1 to 5 migrants. Many times including the facilitator, the person who is in charge of executing the transportation himself, him or herself. And it involves mostly U.S. citizens, which again challenges a lot of the notions that we have, right, that along the U.S. Mexico border, smuggling is facilitated mostly by migrants or by people of Mexican origin. 90% of these convictions, so that is what, 2,200 of them, take place along U.S. border states. And if you look at data that is also coming up from the census, and I've been reading that there's a lot of conversations over what the census is going to start revealing for the next few years. We are talking about the poorest communities in the country, the ones with the highest rates of poverty. So this is again already challenging some of the stereotypes that usually get mobilized concerning migrant smuggling. And another challenge that we have when it comes to talking about smuggling is that we have this very specific person in mind, a character or an actor that is behind smuggling facilitation. And there are some issues with that. First of all, again, as we saw on the other slide, the one that I have right here, is that about a third of all of those convictions, of all of those cases, involve women. But another factor that we tend to forget is that, again, people come in different sizes, and they can be of different ages. So, how did this, topic came up, or how we became involved in the project? I've been studying migrant smuggling along the border since from the time I was a PhD student. That was the core of my dissertation. And before that, I was a criminal investigator in Arizona. So, and for me, a lot of the cases that I was handling that were assigned to me involve reports not of transnational criminal organizations, but actually of poor people from the border, single moms. I just forgot the laborers, the day laborers. You have probably seen those guys that hang out around Home Depot and again, single moms, the elderly, people who were very sick. So this notion of transnational organized crime really didn't match what I was seeing on the ground. And once I started doing a more empirical work on smuggling, migrants and also smuggling facilitators used to tell me, oh, but we have some kids, and they are really great. I'm like, you have kids? Yeah, they are very hardworking, trabajan re bien. But most of most of those references were very anecdotal, right? So they would just come up, every once in a while, somebody would tell me about them. And a couple of years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. actually, when I was approached by migrant advocacy organizations to act as an expert witness on several cases involving children, so these are people under the age of 18, who were in detention facilities, primarily along the, around the DC area. And they had been detained because they had been removed from the border by CBP and sent to detention facilities, as they had been detected to have been crossing the border constantly. Some of them had crossed the border, well, most of the children had crossed the border between 26 and 40 times. And those border crossings were related to the transportation of narcotics or of people. So that's how I actually became engaged into the actual, I became interested, and I really wanted to take a closer look at what the roles of children were. At the same time, I was appointed assistant professor at UTEP, and I was crossing the border frequently to Ciudad Juarez. And I became in contact with the people who were working at the shelters, the people who were actually receiving the kids after they had been sent back to Mexico, following their apprehension as a result of drug trafficking or migrant smuggling activities. And so we came together saying, well, we don't know what is happening to the children on the American side, and you can come and here, maybe we can share information about what is happening to them on the Mexican side and some other dynamics. So this also took place in the context of the very high-profile cases that you have probably heard about, involving the children who were shot and murdered by Border Patrol agents. So that in reports concerning the children identified them as migrant smugglers. So these were, again, some of the concerns that we had when we came together to build the proposal, because we really wanted to work with the children, but not because we were interested in, again, learning more about transnational crime. We wanted to understand what was happening to them, what were their perspectives, and we also wanted to have a better understanding of how to prevent some of those activities from becoming dangerous for the kids and their families. So the work that I am doing in collaboration with DIA, so this is an organization on the Mexican side of the border, in Ciudad Juarez, had specific objectives in mind. First of all, we wanted to look beyond that hyper-representation, right? Like, so whenever we think about the U.S. Mexico border, we think about this horrible place. It's crime-ridden. We don't even go there, right? Like, who knows what may happen to us if we cross the border? Allá matan, and everybody gets killed over there, and everybody dies. Or, women disappear. So our goal was really to look beyond those hyper representations. And in that sense, while we do acknowledge the fact that violence and crime do exist in the experiences of the children, we wanted to look closer at their overall experience, how they felt growing up, being members of those communities, and especially in the context of a very specific set of economic policy that takes place along the U.S. Mexico border. So how did we do it, right? Well, we worked with some of the children who had gone through the detention experience and who had already left the shelter. And so we carried out interviews, we did a lot of participant observation. We also invited them to be our research collaborators. And some of the people in here at the school were actually at one of the sessions that we had with them, where they came and told us, like, you may be the experts, but this is how we see our reality in the border. This is what we want to share with you, and this is what I'm going to share with you today. And the emphasis, once again, was not on figuring out their connections to transnational organized crime. We were more interested in how they themselves develop their own strategies, how we wanted to, and we do acknowledge them as resourceful, very resilient people of the border, who know how to a degree, know how to navigate a lot of the challenges that they face. But we were also, and to this day, we're very much committed to developing additional strategies for them. Because we're very much aware that they are executing, that they are performing a form of labor that puts them at risk. So these were some of the goals that we had. So who are the children, right? And again, we have to, and this was a methodological decision that we made from the very beginning, that we were not, again, going to look at the dynamics that they faced in the context of violence alone or in the context of organized crime, but that we were going to look at how the border economy transformed their experiences or impacted their experiences. So once again, we took a closer look at the forms of labor that people had available on the border. Especially in the case of Ciudad Juarez, we have the manufacturing plants, La Maquiladora, that employs primarily women or that feminizes labor, and which already creates very limited employment opportunities for the people of the border. There's the state strategy is on workforce, right? So they want to create more people who can go and work at the maquila, but there's really no specific training, no specialized training that you need to be a maquila employee, right? So you pretty much just need to be good with your hands and be used to make very monotonous activities, on an everyday basis. And what we started to realize through our interactions with the children was that all forms of labor, not only those that were connected with border crossings, had what am I trying to say here? Allowed children to do three things. One, and this is, and for this here comes the anthropological side of my research. The relationships that people have perhaps you have experiences through your own contacts with your family members, especially if you are of a migrant background. Along the U.S. Mexico border, we also have, as Mexican or Mexican American people, we have different levels of interactions with our elders. We can have in the same house, everybody can live there. Your grandmother, your aunt and uncle that is really not your uncle, but that you call uncle. And so there are different relationships that form within the household. By performing labor, you enter the community, or any form of labor, you're already entering a different community, a community of responsible members, people who are in charge of performing or generating some level of income for your family. Something that we sometimes forget when we talk about the role of children is that they are profiting from their own knowledge of the border geography and landscape. Do we want to profit from what we know? Of course, that is why you're here. You're acquiring this knowledge, you're developing your own expertise. So the children in that sense are profiting from what they know. And one of the advantages of this to the children is the fact that they are getting access to a salary that provides a dignified life for themselves and their families. So I could give you data on how much money they make. They make very good money. But I think it often goes beyond the money that they make. This is actually about what they can provide for their families, how they feel about the support that they can give to their family. And we'll talk about that in a second. So going back to the myth part. And as outsiders, we often think, right, well, it's children. How can you be talking about them as people who work? They don't work. A child should never work. And we tend to hear along the U.S. Mexico border that children are being forced to join, quote unquote, organized crime or the cartels. A word that if you have been in one of my classes, you should never use. And I can tell you, I'm not going to go into that lecture right now. But when we actually ask the children, were you forced, were you coerced? And we don't necessarily ask them that. We ask the question straight, we're very straightforward in case of, how did you enter the activity? How did you join the business? We find out that most recruitment takes place within the children's immediate networks. So this means that they are being recruited by friends and family members who are already part of the market. So it's not a scary narco that comes over to tell them, in most of the cases, it's not a stranger that just approaches them and tells them what they have to do. are friends, family members, classmates, for those who haven't dropped out of school yet, who tell them, you want to come and work for us? You may make, we'll pay you $50 if you come and just hang out. Another narrative that, when I go to meetings, people usually mobilize, is like, well, they are victims of trafficking. So they are victims of human trafficking, or they are children who have a history of child abuse, or they are just victims of violence. And what I often remind people is that, we are infantilizing children. Children, even and young people, have very specific ways in which they understand life. And we should not minimize the ways they see their everyday life. They have very complex understandings of their participation in smuggling. Many times, as people who are involved in the protection or crafting policy that would prevent the children from becoming victims or from returning to more, to quote unquote, exploitative conditions, some people say, well, if we help them stay on the American side after they are arrested, they are probably going to get a better chance, at having a better life. What we have found out through our research is that the children who remain in their communities, because they are more connected with their families, are actually able to transition out of smuggling out of smuggling activities easier than those who remain on the American side, waiting for trafficking proceedings to take place, who may return to a community where their families are, at the time when their families have already moved on, or are really not willing to take them. Imagine you being 15, being apprehended by Border Patrol because of your involvement in drug trafficking or migrant smuggling, and then vanishing for 3 years. That takes you away from your community. That disconnects you from your community. Many of these children are not even allowed to make calls. So their parents don't know where they are. So imagine showing up for 3 years, right? Maybe your mom already moved on to a different community. Maybe your siblings really don't want anything to do with you. Anything to, has to do with you. And one of the key aspects that I think we often forget when we talk about trafficking or victimization is the fact that children love their families. It's how much they love their community. I don't know if you remember from the presentations how excited they were. Yeah, that's my uncle's house. That's where I live. They love Juarez. They love Juarez, they love the music, they love the food. They love the fact that they can spend time with their families. I talk too much in the morning and now my throat is... Okay. So we can, I could sit here and, just go through all the things that we tend to think when we talk about children's participation, but here the presentation is about what they think, right? It's not about us as researchers. So through our interactions, we ask them, what do you feel? What do you think? Why do you do it? And these are some of the points that most often come through those interactions with the kids. So first of all, they really embrace the opportunity to take care of their families. They love taking care of their moms. They love taking care of their little siblings financially. So these are all quotes from them. It feels good to help out my mom, to be able to tell her not to worry. Being able, when you are, 12 or 13, to, oh God, my voice, to tell that to your mom. It's really empowering for a child of that age. You know what? I was able to buy shoes for all of my little siblings. They also like to think of themselves as people who have regular access to ordinary things. They really like to think of themselves as, I'm just a kid. This is one of my favorite quotes. When I ask one of them, like, what do you like to do? What did you used to do with your money? And he told me, "A usted le gusta la pizza." I love pizza. I'm like, well, my favorite is the one with the cheese filled edges. I really like that one. And every weekend we used to go and get some of that, and that felt really great. So these are the kind of experiences that get lost when we only think about organized crime, when it comes to the lives of the kids. And I love how he used to write this, like, oh, it's just normal things. It's, lo que nos gusta a los niños como yo. What kids my age, regular kids like. The other thing that I think gets forgotten most of the time, and if you go back to time when you were 12 or 13 and you had your first boyfriend or girlfriend, they fall in love. They develop all of these affective ties with people. What we have seen, however, that is worrisome to some level is the fact that they become parents at a very early age. So, and they have to, at that point, they are not only responsible, or not only they assume the responsibility of taking care of their own family, but also they take over responsibilities from their other family, right? So this is another quote from one of the kids. Pues me enamoré. Like, I fell in love. I fell in love, I had a girlfriend, we had a baby, and I quit that job. I really wanted a different life. I didn't want to continue working, getting people across. But then the only job that I could get was bagging groceries. And I wasn't making as much money, so I ended up going back. Again, showing you that it's not, people being forced by organized crime, but actually from other, by other circumstances. The kids also learn how to care for one another in the context of the work that they perform. So this is a quote from, there were two friends who were also at our event in April. And one of them was describing how they were trying to get people across the canal, in the El Paso area, and one of them got dragged by the current. So like one day I almost died. My partner or my friend pulled me out of the water, otherwise the current would have pulled me. We have been best friends since then, since. Oh God. Another quote here that also reveals this complexity, the fact that children understand the dangers of irregular migration, and also mobilize those notions concerning the care and protection that they provide for the migrants whose transits they facilitate. The first quote is from a 14-year-old. And when we asked him, like, what did you feel? What happened whenever you would go? He was a driver. He was driving groups of people. How would you select the people that were at the safe houses, the people who were staying, locations where you would go and pick them up? And he was very clear, or articulating, whenever I would go pick up the people, I would select the women and the girls first, because they reminded me of my mom and my sisters. And I didn't want for them to go through any of the risks and any of the challenges that some women may face. And this second quote right here is from a girl who acted as some kids work as decoys. So they ride in cars, crossing the border. They have documents to cross the border. And so they ride along in a sense to distract Border Patrol agents. And this was a quote from one of them, like, "Oh, I would cry every time we would help getting families together, getting families together. So bien chillona, like I cry a lot. But it feels so nice to see what we can do through our work." It would be, I guess, it will be wrong for us not to acknowledge the fact that at the same time the children do face a lot of risks. So they are working on a highly criminalized market along the U.S. Mexico border, which is one of the, I don't have to tell you how dangerous the context is. And many times the kids are unable to face the risks or the challenges on their own. So we also documented the cases, the times when they are not able to mobilize a strategy to meet the market, or again, some of the security challenges that they face as children. Some of them, for example, don't like the job. They get tired. They are, again, 12, 13, 14 years old. And they don't like having to get up early or having to work late at night. And on many occasions, they actually work with friends and family members. And they are very much aware that the job that they are doing is It's not something that everybody likes or that everybody will be on board with. This is a quote on one of the kids that we were working with, and this is one of the social workers describing it during one of the interviews. This was a kid that was really nice. He was very well liked at the shelter. And they eventually found out that his dad was the one who was making him work. He really didn't want to stay, but he didn't know how to say no to his dad. Another set of interactions that is very problematic in terms of the impact to the children's safety is the kinds of interactions that they have in CBP. And so this is with Border Patrol. And these are again quotes from the kids. And one is, La Migrant, immigration was questioning me in front of everybody. So imagine being in detention, being surrounded by adults and other children who also know what you do. This is already putting the kids in a very difficult position because they have to confess pretty much that they are involved in criminal activity. And many times CBP does this. They don't take them to a separate room where they can take a statement, in private. They do it in public. Many times just to, increase the level of intimidation with the kids. So in this case, the kid said, I feared that somebody would go back and tell my boss that I was giving information about him or her. So of course I didn't tell them anything. I love this quote because of how much it says about the experiences of the kids. So this is a 16-year-old. He started smuggling activities when he was 11, and he was actually given a trafficking visa, so he was allowed to stay in the U.S. territory. And he says, they asked me how many times, and this was immigration. Immigration asked me how many times I had smuggled people, and I said, ¿Qué te importa, güey? I'm like, what do you care? Like, maybe I did it 20, 30, 40 times. I don't know. And the officer wrote it down as if that was the truth. I was mad. I was angry. I had gotten caught. He wrote it all down, and then they let me go. And then when they caught me again, they brought that statement against him in court. They caught me again and sent me to court. The attorney for the government said I had admitted to the crime. Like, chingao. Like, what else was I supposed to do? Like how, and I think this reveals the frustration that the children feel. Like, they're questioning me without the presence of an attorney, without letting my parents know that you have me here. And what are you going to do with what I tell you? You're always going to use it against me. Another set of actors that is very active when it comes to the experiences of the children that appears often in the narratives of the children are indeed organized criminal actors. And the children have very specific experiences concerning those interactions. So one child described being brought blindfolded to a location where his employer, who allegedly had ties to drug trafficking, unleashed a fight dog onto him when the child asked for a day off from work. And so this experiences with intimidation or violence are actually very common in the experiences of many of the kids. Like the second one, they used to come look for my friend at the house. He will tell them, no, I don't want to do it anymore. But I mean, will you say no to them? This were a group of kids in Juarez. They would just park the car outside the house and my friend would have to get in. He was good at what he did and he was too valuable to them. So many times what the children also face is that they are very good at what they do. They know the roads, they know the routes, they know at what time, what are the good times to cross. They take good care of the people. And many times the people who employ them are like, you're too valuable. I really can't let you go. You need to stay. You need to continue working with me. There's also the dynamics of how many times the families have come to rely on the income of the children. So it's not that easy for a child to say, sure, I'm going to leave, even if I'm not facing any kind of coercion. That's because maybe one of his or her siblings needs a specific medication. or because they know that without their income, their mom is really not going to be able to afford providing, for the entire family. So again, the decisions are very complex in that sense. The next couple of slides is just kind of, closing comments, in a sense, a set of conclusions that we have developed concerning the activities of the children. And one is the very realization or indication that there's no actual evidence that the children engage in any kind of violent activity. So we never came across any indication in any of the official reports or the statements of the children that they carried weapons or that they were violent again, they engaged in any kind of organized violence against migrants. There were also no specific references to the children and smuggling being connected to other criminal markets, like drug trafficking, for example, which is something that we hear quite often. Well, it's drug trafficking, it's the same as migrant smuggling, weapons smuggling, all of the smugglings. So, something that I often raise during my presentations is the fact that models that use organized crime as the only defining element are actually short-sighted. They are only paying partial attention to the experiences of the people on the ground and further criminalize them. And that is because the challenges that many of the children face cannot be traced only to organized crime. Here again, we're talking about family dynamics, gender dynamics that are very much present, that predate even the involvement of the children in any kind of activity like this, any kind of criminalized or illicit activity. They are, and when people ask me, like, well, those drug traffickers are being violent towards them, or they are intimidating them, like that guy that you just talked about, the one with the dog. And some of the findings of our study are connected to the fact that what the children face, or the children are rather at a disadvantage when it comes to adults. So it's not necessarily connected to a specific market. But once again, for example, we see it in the interactions with parents, how I cannot leave that market because I'm working with my dad or for my dad. Well, I'm losing my voice as we speak, so. Is there anything else that I would like you to? If there's something that I want you to take away from this presentation, is the fact that young people articulate very clear notions of care and protection in their interactions, not only with migrants, but also with one another. So we find through the evidence that we have collected during this time that they do provide a form of care. And in a sense, this is a form of human security from below. They are people who have been marginalized. So they have to come up with their own strategies to remain safe against the efforts that exclude them, that have, especially along the U.S. Mexico border, continue to exclude them. There's also the recognition that the regular migration processes are very precarious, especially for those who have very limited social and financial capital, which is the work that Stephanie and Keith are doing here, stressing. And in that sense, whenever we hear all of these trafficking narratives or organized crime narratives that frame the experiences of children as exploitation or victimization alone, we are failing to identify other dynamics that come into place. Once again, the dynamics of family, of love, the more affective levels of interactions that take place within smuggling facilitation. In that sense, we have to do a better job as researchers and also as policymakers, those of you who want to go into policy, in terms of how we bring those experiences of the children on the ground into the work that we do. In a fashion that doesn't other their communities or the own experiences of their families, of how they decide to, the kinds of labor choices that they make. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much. I'll take all of your questions, and I hope not to lose my voice. Questions? Please.
Like how how widespread this is, like how many cases you're aware of, and what the average age of these children?
Okay. Age. Children report, well, there's different sources of data. We go back to, it depends. We're going to get different information depending on who we're talking with. The children we have been working with, their ages range, well, we haven't interviewed all of them, but the sense that we have in terms of their ages, they can enter the smuggling business as early as age of 7. So we have indications of some of them entering that young. Most of them are around between 11 and 12. There's some outliers when it comes, to age. Some of them are already 16 or 17, but it's easier for children around between the ages of 11 and 14 to be involved. So that's kind of the median. How widespread it is. Oh God, I'm really sorry that this voice is failing me. How widespread this is. Along the U.S. Mexico border, we have evidence of this occurring pretty much at every one of the ports of entry. So we have cases in Tijuana, we have cases in Ciudad Juarez. There's a very high level of activity in South Texas, what is Reynosa, Matamoros. There's, at the same time, not a very clear understanding when it comes to describing their activities. So many people talk about them as victims of trafficking, others refer to them as being deeply involved with drug trafficking organizations. So it's, again, an issue of methodology and how they are being counted. There are no official estimates of how many there are.
And then my question was also kind of a data question. At the very beginning of your talk, you described about a third of convictions are women.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, kind of twofold, if about a third of the cases brought forth are also women, or if it's just convictions and those percentages aren't the same. And then also within the interviews you've been able to have, do you see about a third of youth and adolescent participants being women, or do you think that percentage changes as they get older?
You tried to break that into your two pieces as well. I already forgot the first part. When it comes to prosecution, so these are prosecutions that are actual prosecutions finalized, cases that are actually brought into court and people accepting their sentences. One of the challenges that we have documented, especially in the case of women, is that many of them are not charged with smuggling. So they are charged with other offenses, like use of electronic equipment, or in collaboration with organized criminal activity, fraud. A lot of them are actually charged with fraud. So by that, we don't really, the number of women who are affiliated or associated with the smuggling operations along the U.S. Mexico border is really skewed. So this again shows that about a third of the convictions at the federal level, which is also, a very specific small number, will involve women. But we don't know how many of them were originally apprehended on their, smuggling charge. So that is one of the things. In the case of children are protected. So children should actually not be, or any person under the age of 18 should be prosecuted for migrant smuggling at the federal level. What we have seen along the U.S. Mexico border is that many local jurisdictions or counties are actually filing charges against kids also for migrant smuggling regardless of their age. So we have, most of the cases that have been documented have taken place along the Sonora-Arizona border. So they may be 14 or 15, and then charges for migrant smuggling as adults are filed against them. This data is very problematic in the sense that it's very hard to access. So we have actually placed several requests. It's like, can we know how many children have been prosecuted? And that, every time that we have tried to follow up in a case, we have been told that there's no data. We don't do that to the children. They are kids. So there's also the politics that comes with, do I really want to tell you how many children are being prosecuted? I hope that answered it. Yes.
I'm wondering if your work has touched at all on the effects of the disruption of children's education by becoming involved in this, and if maybe there have been any kind of adaptations the children have taken on themselves to kind of fill the gaps where they're not in a regular school system.
Yes. That's a great question. Most of the children start They start dropping out of school when they are on 4th grade. By the time they are 11, all of them are out of school. Am I crazy? Yeah, by the time they are 11 years old, everybody has been out. So the kids that we have been able to work with at the shelters are taking some sort of remedial education. And the shelters have often have educational programs in place so that they can complete at least junior high. The grant that we were able to get following the grant that we got from you guys is from the Mexican federal government. That this should allow for the provision of education that at least allows the kids to complete, to get what would be a preparatoria, high school diploma. But this is, again, many times the children find more useful to get jobs. This is, again, we go back to the fact that maquiladoras pay really, to us, according to our standards, maquiladoras don't really give you, pay a lot. But for a kid who's 15 or 16 and who really wants to continue providing for his or her family, this is a very viable alternative. So many times we have to deal with those challenges. It's like, education is great for you. You should go back and we can help you and we can support you in that sense. When we had the plenary back in April, we asked them, what do you want to do? One of them wanted to be a criminologist. One of the girls actually wanted to be a criminologist. And all of the boys wanted to be police officers, which also, again, reveals the complexity of what they aspire to be. So they see law enforcement careers as something that will give them the status and maybe even the income that they are looking for.
I'm curious about how far north of the border and how far south they typically operate, I guess. And like what they're working, like what their day, I guess, like do they work for like weeks at a time, or is it like short distances, so it's like 6 hours a day or something like that?
I would have to spend like another hour
Okay.
telling you everything they do. And I am going to connect this to the question that somebody was asking earlier about how widespread, the practice is. Most of the cases that we are aware of take place along the U.S. Mexico border. And this is because, once again, it has the systems to provide quote-unquote protection are in place along the border. Now, that doesn't mean that we have other children who work as facilitators in other regions, so, along the migration route. One other aspect that is very interesting to highlight, the involvement of young people in migrant smuggling markets has been documented around the world. So it's not only the U.S. Mexico border. We're trying to find some partners in Greece and Egypt, because they have been very well, the cases that point at that involvement have been very well documented. There's also children who used to be in the fishing industry in Indonesia who, as a result of trade agreements, have to exit that market and are now actually very active in the migrant smuggling market in Indonesia. So this actually shows, once again, that it's not necessarily quote-unquote organized crime as we usually think about it, but the lack of employment opportunities for even bigger number of people. So I hope that in a sense addresses your question. Yeah. So we don't think that it is restricted to the U.S. Mexico border. I think you can find it everywhere.
We're in the public policy school here at the University of Texas, and the policies that we hear most about with respect to the border are build a wall and strengthen the border patrol, increase the number of border patrolmen. From your research, what would be a policy recommendation that would ameliorate the situations that you have described, and what would be the policy solution that would be a dramatic improvement in the overall situation of children migrants?
First of all, I don't think of migration as a problem. Migration in general is not a problem. So if people want to go to other locations, they should be allowed to go wherever they want to go. I think, once again, it's the criminalization of migration, what is at the core of many of our concerns. Is anybody from here, from the border? How often, have you heard about the wall thing during your lifetimes?
Pretty often.
Pretty often. We get asked this question all the time. Like, what do you think about the wall? What do you think about the fence? When this has been pretty much a constant element of our experience. So I think once again that question on the wall is really, many of the questions that are connected to the U.S. Mexico border have failed to take into consideration the fact that this is our everyday life. So that when people come and tell us, is it going to affect your life? Well, it's been affecting it for as long as I can remember. I can go see my family members in Mexico, or coming back, going through the border crossings. It can take me 5 minutes and it can take me 3 hours. So there are many other challenges that are connected with everyday life that sometimes we forget, with all of the noise that is very much connected to the fence. Now, when it comes to specific policy actions, some of the points that we have actually raised, when it comes to basic protection, don't question the children in public. Why do you have to question them in front of everybody as CBP when it comes to law enforcement? If you want to, why is it that the children don't have access to legal counsel? Why is it that they don't have the right to call their parents or to have a parent present when they're being questioned by CBP? So those have been points that we have brought up in terms of immediate protection that is connected with law enforcement. When it comes to their everyday lives within the community, it's the creation of educational, bringing educational options to the community. Juárez, el ayuntamiento, the city, is really not interested in building more schools or bringing high schools into these neighborhoods, because they are not interested in developing the population itself. They want an available workforce that can just go work at the maquila. So once again, bringing educational options into the neighborhoods where nobody else will dare to go because they are again labeled as too dangerous or too risky for anybody to go. Is another option. So those are two that I will.
So the education's on the Mexican side?
Of course, yes. In this case, it will be the Mexican side.
Can you explain just briefly why you don't like the use of the term cartels?
What is a cartel? Anyone? Here we go.
Like a gang, organized criminal organization?
What is the basic definition? So this is already, kind of affiliated or generates a lot of ideas that are connotated with a single term. The term cartel was actually not something that the organizations had historically taken and were given themselves. So this was a policy term that is very much connected to the war on drugs in the Colombian case. So this was the label that was given to them. And then the Mexican organizations were the ones that adopted it. So many times you hear the term cartel, cartel but this was something that came from the original label that was provided to them. Another factor that comes to the definition is the fact that drug trafficking organizations are not cartels. They do not come together to settle prices, which is the basic definition. So that's why when people come and tell me, oh, this is the cartel, they are drug trafficking organizations. But of course, there are different takes. Some people would really have a very strong preference for that term. But I always caution people against. Any other questions?
I'll actually ask the last question. Do you find a gendered breakdown for the children that cross migrants or move migrants across the border? For girls and boys, is there a gendered breakdown of labor? And also in general with women and men?
So there's two ways actually to answer that question. When it comes to people under the age of 18, we see that most of the children are men, so they are young boys and adolescents, male adolescents. When it comes to the prosecution side, sometimes when I've interviewed law enforcement, they tell me like, well, we don't go after the women. but then when you talk to the male facilitators, they tell you, women are everywhere, they're taking over. It's just that nobody, las viejas están en todos lados. And what we, and then I am going to kind of connect both questions in that sense. What we see is that, again, many times the women are arrested or apprehended under smuggling charges, but they are not charged with smuggling at the end. And many of them are also deported. So they are immediately pretty much taken out of the picture. So we don't really know, how many of them, we don't know if the percentage is an accurate reflection of their involvement in working. So that's another question that, if anybody's interested in tackling, I would be also very interested in talking.
Great, well, thank you so much, Gabrielle, for this fascinating presentation. If you could all join me in thank you.